There is a specific kind of stress in standing over a hot stove, hands full, and realizing the one tool you need has simply vanished. We've accepted this as normal, but it didn't used to be this way. Not that long ago, women ran kitchens a fraction of the size of what most of us have today, and nothing was ever lost. Not because they had less or because they were somehow more naturally organized, but because they followed a system, a quiet, practical system built around how cooking actually happens. And once it was in place, the kitchen practically ran itself. That system still works. And today, we're going to walk through all 6 habits together. Welcome to Wise Aging Seniors. This channel is about the quiet wisdom built into older ways of living and how we bring it into our homes right now. If that speaks to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Now, let's get into this. So, let's start with the first habit. And this one is the foundation everything else is built on. So, it's worth getting clear on before we move forward. When we organize a kitchen today, we tend to think in categories. Baking supplies together, canned goods together, spices on the one rack. That logic makes sense on paper, but it's missing something the 1950s kitchen understood deeply. The 1950s kitchen was not organized by category. It was organized by sequence. Everything was placed according to how the body actually moved through the kitchen during cooking, not where something belonged in the abstract, but where it was needed and when. Think about making a simple pot of soup. You fill the pot at the sink. You carry it to the stove. You reach for the cutting board, the knife, the onion. You reach for the salt. You reach for the ladle when it's time to serve. In that kitchen, each of those items lived exactly where it was needed in that sequence. Within arm's reach of the action, not across the room, not buried behind 3 other things. The wooden spoon lived at the stove. The colander lived near the sink. The butter dish lived near the toaster and the bread box. Because that was the sequence. Bread, butter, toast. Everything knew its place, not because someone labeled it, but because the placement was chosen around actual use. Now, here is where this gets practical for us today. And this is the easiest place to start. Pick one area of your kitchen, just one. The stove, the coffee station, wherever you do most of your prep work. Stand there and ask, what do I reach for most when I'm working right here? Is it within arm's reach? Or am I crossing the kitchen to get it every single time? That question is the whole system in miniature. The answers are almost always obvious once you ask, and the changes are small. A few things move to where they're actually needed, that's all. That's the beginning. But knowing where something should go is only half the battle. The system only works if that item actually ends up there every single time. Which brings us to the second habit. The second habit is the one that makes the first habit stick, and it is the simplest thing imaginable. Every single object had one home, not a preferred spot, not a general area, not usually in this drawer somewhere. One home, the same place, every single time. The lid went back on the canister. The vegetable peeler went back to the second slot in the utensil drawer. The scissors went back to the hook inside the cabinet door, not to keep things tidy for company, but because In the middle of cooking with both hands full and something on the stove, you reached for what you needed and it was there, without looking, without thinking, without stopping. That is a real kind of freedom, the freedom of not having to search. Now, it's worth being honest about where this habit came from, because some of us are old enough to know the fuller picture. The women who ran those kitchens weren't doing it entirely by choice. Many of them were home because that was what was expected. We're not holding that up as an ideal. We're not going back to that. But within that reality, something genuinely useful was built. Habits that work just as well today on our own terms. We can take the wisdom without taking the world it came from. So the question to ask now is simply this: does each thing in our kitchen have one home? And is that home the right one? Meaning, is it actually where we reach for it? If something has been sitting in a temporary spot for months, that is worth noticing. Not with frustration, with curiosity. Every object without a clear home will eventually cost us time and energy, and the low-level irritation of looking for something that should just be there. And it won't always be perfect. Things will still get set down in the wrong place. The kitchen will drift a little on a busy day. That's just life. But the difference between a kitchen with this habit and one without is that recovery is fast. A few minutes of returning things to their homes rather than a full weekend reorganization. Now, once everything has a home and goes back there, the next question becomes, are we actually keeping up with what we have? Are we buying things we already own? Are things expiring quietly at the back of a shelf? That's where the third habit comes in, and it's the one most people skip entirely. The third habit moves us out of the kitchen itself and into something that happens just before the week begins. And this is the one most people skip entirely, which is exactly why things go to waste. It was called simply checking before shopping. Before a grocery list was written, before anything went into a cart, there was a deliberate walk through the pantry, the refrigerator, and the cabinets to see exactly what was there, what was running low, what needed to be used before anything new came in. The shopping list came from that check, not from memory, not from habit, not from a mental picture that turned out to be wrong. From what was actually there. Many households kept a small notepad on the fridge or a chalkboard inside a cabinet door for exactly this purpose. When something ran low, it went on the list right then, not when it ran out, not when you reached for it and found it wasn't there, but the moment you noticed it getting low. This made it very hard for things to go to waste. Not impossible, because no system is perfect, but genuinely difficult, because the structure was working against waste rather than relying on memory or good intentions to prevent it. Nothing expired quietly at the back of the shelf. Nothing got doubled up by accident. The pantry was a living inventory, checked and tended consistently. For many of us, the emotional weight behind this habit is real. A lot of us grew up in households where nothing was wasted because nothing could afford to be wasted. That instinct doesn't go away. It lives in the guilt of finding something forgotten at the back of the fridge. The pantry check is a form of respect for what we have. It says, I know what's here, I value what's here, and I'm going to use it before I bring in more. Today, that might be a notepad on the fridge or a note on a phone. The tool doesn't matter. The habit does. Walking through before shopping, writing the list, after the check, not before. And here is what most people get wrong. They think this takes discipline. It doesn't. Discipline is what you need before a habit is formed. Once it's in place, you just do it. The same way you check your phone before leaving the house. Now, the pantry check is what happens before we shop. But once the food is in the house, there is a second problem. And it's the one that quietly undoes all that good intention. Things get pushed to the back, dates get missed, good food goes to waste anyway. The fourth habit is what prevents that. The fourth habit is about what happens after the shopping is done. And it is the difference between a fridge that works for us and one that slowly fills up with things we meant to use. The use-it-up logic was so deeply built into how those kitchens ran that most people who lived it wouldn't have even named it as a system. It was simply the way things were done. New things went to the back. Older things came to the front. Whatever was nearest its end came first. The half-used carton of broth moved to the front of the shelf. It needed to go into something this week. The fresh carton went behind it. The older block of cheese was used before the new one was opened. The vegetables that had been in the crisper longest appeared in tonight's dinner. Nothing was set aside because something better came along. You used what you had, finished it, and then opened the next one. There was also a specific relationship with leftovers worth naming, because it was not the relationship many of us have with our refrigerators today. Leftovers were not put in the fridge to be dealt with later. They were put there with a day already in mind. Tuesday's roast became Wednesday's hash. The extra rice appeared in Thursday's soup. The cooked vegetables folded into Friday's eggs. Leftovers weren't a loose end, they were a plan. This is where the kitchen stopped being a place where things accumulated and became a place where things moved. Everything came in, everything was used, and everything went out. There was no graveyard of forgotten items building up silently at the back of every shelf. For many of us now, the fridge especially becomes a place where things go and are not seen again. We buy thoughtfully, we intend well, and then the week gets away from us and we feel that familiar deflation when we open the door and find the evidence. The use-it-up logic is simply this. Before the new comes in, the old gets used. Before we open the second, we finish the first. It is not deprivation. It is a rhythm. And once it becomes a rhythm, the habit does the work, not the willpower. There will still be weeks when something gets away from us, but those become the exception rather than the rule. And recovery is easy because the system is already there. Now, the first 4 habits are all about how we work inside the kitchen. The 5th one is about the kitchen itself, specifically the one surface that either supports everything we're doing or quietly works against it every single day. If this is resonating, if this quieter, more intentional way of thinking about home feels like something worth holding on to, then Wise Aging Seniors is where you want to be. This is what we do here. We look at what actually worked, we bring it forward, and we make it usable for the lives we're living now. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment. We would love to have you with us for everything still to come. The 5th habit is one that will change how the kitchen feels every single day. And it has nothing to do with buying anything or reorganizing anything. It has to do with one surface. The counter is a workspace, not a display surface, not a storage zone, not the place where things land because there is nowhere else for them to go. A surface that exists to support the work of cooking, and that is kept clear so it can do that job the moment it is needed. In a 1950s kitchen, the toaster was not a permanent fixture on the counter. It came out when toast was being made, and when the toast was done, it went back. The hand mixer came out for the cake, and when the cake was in the oven, it went back. The flour and sugar canisters might live on the counter because they were used daily, but they were placed there deliberately, with that daily use in mind, not because the counter happened to be convenient. The result of keeping that surface clear was a kitchen that felt peaceful the moment you walked into it. A clear counter says, "This room is ready. There is room here to begin." A counter covered in things, even useful things, even things we love, creates friction every single time we walk in. Even if we don't notice it consciously, a cluttered counter makes us feel rushed before we even start. We move things to make room. We navigate around things. There is a low, persistent tension that we have simply learned to live with because it has always been there. Now, here is where most people get stuck. They think clearing the counter means getting rid of things. It doesn't. It means deciding, asking honestly, what lives here because I use it every single day, and what lives here because I haven't yet figured out where else it goes. The things used daily can stay, but by decision, not by default. Everything else deserves a real home somewhere else, or a donation, or a release, not the counter. This is not about minimalism as an aesthetic. It is about having room to work and room to think without moving anything first. That is available to all of us in whatever kitchen we have. And once the counter is clear and the first 5 habits are in place, there is one final thing needed to make sure none of this slowly unravels. And that is the 6th habit. It is the shortest one to describe and probably the most important of all. And the 6th habit, this is the one that holds everything else together. Without it, the other 5 habits slowly come undone. With it, the whole system maintains itself. It is the end-of-day reset. Every evening, after the dinner dishes were done and put away, the kitchen was returned to its ready state. Not a deep clean, not a reorganization. Simply a returning, surfaces cleared. Anything that had wandered from its home during the day was put back. The dish towel straightened or changed, the notepad on the fridge checked. Anything running low that needed to go on the list? The kitchen was returned to the condition it was in at the start of the day, ready for morning. This took 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes less. It wasn't an optional extra at the end of a long day. It was simply the close of the kitchen, the way you might close up any other workspace when the day's work is done. What this habit protected against was the drift, the slow, invisible accumulation of small disorder that compounds over days until, by the end of the week, the kitchen feels hard to manage, and we can't quite say why. We didn't notice the item set in the wrong place on Monday. We didn't notice the 2 things that migrated to the counter on Tuesday. But Friday arrives, and the kitchen feels heavy. This is where most people who try to get organized eventually give up. Not because the system failed, but because the drift crept back, and there was nothing in place to catch it. The end-of-day reset is what catches it every day before it compounds. There is also something about waking up to a kitchen already in order, already on our side before the day has even started, that is hard to put into words, but very easy to feel. The first room we walk into sets a tone. A kitchen that greets us ready is a different beginning than one that greets us with yesterday still waiting on the counter. And here's something worth knowing, because it is easy to hear this habit and think, I don't have that energy at the end of the day. That is a fair concern. But what most people find is that the reset gets shorter the longer they practice it. Not because they move faster, but because the kitchen is holding. Things went back to their one home during the day. The counter stayed clear. There is simply less to restore. What starts as 15 minutes becomes 5. Not because the bar was lowered, but because the other 5 habits are doing their work, and the reset is just closing out what is already nearly done. The kitchen starts to feel easier, not effortless. A kitchen still takes attention, but lighter, because the structure is carrying more of the load. Let's close with something simple. We don't have to rebuild anything. We don't have to overhaul a kitchen that has served us well. None of these 6 habits require a renovation, a new set of containers, or a free weekend. They require only a decision, repeated quietly, consistently, until it becomes the way things are. What we are building here is not a perfect kitchen. We are building a kitchen that cooperates. One where we reach for something and it's there. Where the counter has room to work. Where the week doesn't end with a refrigerator full of good intentions that didn't get used. Where the morning begins in order, because the night before we gave our future selves that small gift. That is what the reset is, really. That is what all 6 of these habits are. Small gifts to the person we will be tomorrow morning, standing at the stove, reaching for what we need. The 1950s didn't invent that wisdom. They just practiced it well, and so can we. If this kind of content feels useful, practical, and rooted in real life, this is what Wise Aging Seniors is here for. Subscribe so you're with us for what comes next, and we would love to know which of these 6 habits feels most doable for you right now. Drop it in the comments. We read every one.